Hi, welcome back to the Cities Reimagined podcast, to this bonus episode, to the talk I had with Gerfried Ambrosch on reimagining urban wildlife habitats. That's right, I also never thought that I would have a D-beat punk rock metal sludge intro to the show, but here it is. This was by the band Plague Mass. Gerfried played guitar in this, and was released in 2008 on Noise Appeal Records from Vienna, Austria. Shoutouts to Michael and Dominic from the label at this point. But I hope you listened and liked the Cities Reimagined episode with Gerfried, and I thought, while having him on the show and having a conversation which we record, I better ask him on some off-topic questions on his background in do-it-yourself punk rock and hardcore, because this guy has some crazy stories to tell. At that time, the Plague Mass was also a very active band. That was a band from Graz, and they were very active and touring a lot. At that time, somehow Graz was really on the map within Europe, because there were so many interesting bands touring Europe, and I think also beyond. That time was from 2000 to 2010. And the Plague Mass also did some tours in places where at that time you would probably not go as a punk rock band. And I would encourage you to listen in to hear about Gerfried's stories about touring Belarus and some other places. Alright, so here it is. The bonus episode to the talk I had with Gerfried on urban amphibians. No quarks here. We know each other for a long time, and it goes back to our musical roots in punk and hardcore. And you've been very active in the scene, and you played in so many bands from the early 2000s on. Some are based in London, and some
late 90s even.
Late 90s even. Some were based in London, and I actually looked on your Discogs or in Discogs to see what bands you were involved in, and I didn't even know in how many bands you were involved in. And most of them are having
and it's not a complete list.
It's not a complete list, and you should edit it on Discogs.
Well, I have nothing to do with it. I'm not on Discogs really. It's just like
someone else.
Someone did that. Someone did that.
Yeah. But coming out of the scene of the 90s and 2000s, that was a very political scene as well, and political time in this alternative culture and alternative subculture. How did this time of being engaged in a scene which kind of constantly challenged the status quo of anything and experimented with partly radical ideas, for example, veganism? You're a vegan yourself. In 2000 was a very radical statement. Nowadays, it's maybe not that radical anymore, and people do it for other reasons, lifestyle reasons. How did that shape you today?
Well, I think that's one of the first things I said in this discussion was that, like my attitude of just going out and doing things, that's just a DIY punk spirit. Like that's. It's basically the same idea. Like you live in a small town. Like I grew up in Graz, right? You want more bands to come through because you want to see them. You start putting on shows, right? You start promoting shows, and then there's going to be more bands coming through your town. So I think that really was that's sort of the genesis of like my approach, really. And also, if you're involved with that, you kind of, and you play in bands, you kind of like get around a lot. You meet a lot of people. You see things. You travel like to places where you wouldn't ordinarily go like for vacation, right? Also, you're immediately, you know, like welcomed into like a local community there, which I always really appreciated. And then like people will show you around, and um, like their small town, for instance, that's very much like the one you grew up in,
Yeah.
but it's in Serbia, right? So it's quite, it's been quite an interesting experience
Yeah.
over the
I
past 2.5 decades.
Yeah, and
Mm.
I can totally relate to that. I didn't tour at all or just a little here and there, but I can totally relate to what you said about how you get engaged and how you start things. So when I was 16 or 15 or so, I started setting up shows in my hometown in Klagenfurt because it was super boring
You did,
there.
yeah.
And that's also why you and your band Plague Mass at the time, I guess, came around that town a couple of times. And
Yeah, yeah, we did, yeah.
you mentioned it you mentioned it earlier that you also toured a lot of places where you would not go on holidays
No.
to. And I remember that you told me some really interesting and fascinating and also scary stories from these places. Is there a story you would like to share? A touring story?
Well, there's obviously there's so many, but like in uh because it's been on the news lately, like Belarus, like that would be an example of a country that 20 years ago, it was 20, pretty much, yeah, 20 years ago, 2004, 19 years ago, that we went there. We went to Minsk, and I forgot the name of the other town. We had like 3 shows lined up, but we had to. The government made us cancel one of them. Like that was one of the, because we were only allowed like a transit visa.
That was
Um,
with Plague Mass, right?
with Plague Mass, yeah,
Yeah.
in 2004. It was very difficult. Like we were just trying to get into the country was very difficult because um, we pulled up at the embassy in Vilnius, Lithuania, to get like our visas, right? Um, they only spoke Russian, of course, but like kind of we had a person with us that spoke Russian, so that was okay. But they were like, um, the only like you cannot get a visa for, you cannot just drive into Belarus, right? Um, the only visa you can get at a reasonable price, it was still like like €100 per person, which was
Oh,
a lot
for a
of
punk
money
band.
for a punk band, but also like for I mean, there was nothing official about it. It was just like a lot of bribery and things like that, and it was just really just sketchy. Um, what happened was that they said they can give us like a transit visa for that, so we can spend like 2 days in the country, but we have to then get out of the country again. Um, and they were like, and the only way you can prove this to us if you get train tickets, right? So I went to the train station, got train tickets to Minsk and back to Vilnius. To Vilnius, and so we showed up with those train tickets the next day. They said those are no good because it's only transit if you go to a third country, right?
Uh,
They're like, okay, well, right, let's go back, trade those, get train tickets um, from Vilnius to Minsk, and then to Ukraine, right? Which we did, but obviously we had no intention of going to Ukraine because we didn't have any shows lined up there. We
yeah.
had to go back. Our van was back in Vilnius, right? We had to go back there. So what happened was that we then got those train tickets, showed them. They gave us the transit visas. Then we went back to the train station, returned the train tickets, and got like coach tickets, bus tickets instead,
Yeah.
for a bus that would go that went from like Vilnius to Minsk and back. All right. Um, or no, just from Vilnius to Minsk actually, and then after the shows, we would get a bus, another bus that would get us to Poland, and then we'd have someone in Vilnius drive our van from Lithuania to Poland and pick us up, like literally on the side of the road. And all of that worked out, which is great. It was just, again, sketchy as fuck,
Yeah.
but, we just, the borders and everything was just like bribery and, things like that. But, and of course, the shows were interesting because at the time, all the shows that they put on, like the local punk scene, in Minsk had to be secret shows because they had such a huge like neo-Nazi problem there. They couldn't announce shows, they couldn't promote shows because if like Nazis found out like where the shows were, they would show up and beat everyone up and just basically destroy the show, right? So it had to be, it was secret, and the venue was only announced or disclosed like on the same day, like just mere hours before the concert. And that show was sort of like a little outside of town, like in a small village, at what I guess was sort of like an old communist like campsite kind of thing. Like they had like little huts, like in the main reception building, which was completely abandoned, right? And the concert was like in the reception building, right? Ahead of the show, people would patrol the area like in their cars to see if any Nazis were showing up, right? So a local train station, and then suddenly everybody seemed alarmed, and somebody had like seen like apparently like two like Nazi-looking guys at the local train station, right? And then what happened was that everybody started collecting rocks, cutting off branches of trees, and making them like pointy with their knives. Everybody had a knife, of course, and they were just in complete like medieval defend the castle mode, right? All of a sudden, and we were there. We're like, what is happening here? Right? Like,
That's insane.
this is just crazy. And I was like, okay. Um, um, so they were all sort of like really really alarmed. Nothing in the end, like nothing happened. Nobody showed up. Even though like the previous night, like or like a couple of weeks before, like they had a show there or tried to have a show there, but somebody called in a bomb threat, and so the police shut it down. So, but that didn't happen. The show went ahead. Because we were traveling by bus, we couldn't bring any of our own equipment, so we played with whatever was there. There weren't even like microphone stands or anything, which we needed. So I remember distinctly this. I think it was Chris or Schnee. Remember Schnee?
Yeah.
We had to like fashion like a microphone stand out of like a chair and a baseball bat,
Oh my God.
just with scotch tape, not even
Yeah.
like gaffer tape, just scotch tape,
Yeah.
and like put the microphone on top, right? So it's like a microphone stand. And so the show went ahead. It was mayhem. It was just it was like hundreds of people there. It was just a crazy, I don't know. It was just it probably sounded like shit. It was just chaos, right? It was
Yeah.
really crazy. And I remember like the next day, we then went to the local train station. It was like it's I think like a 2 mile walk or something like that, and got on a train back to Minsk because that's where we were gonna catch a taxi to the next gig. And the train ride was just incredible because like for some reason it was the most depressing thing ever. It's just train was pretty packed, but nobody on the train spoke. Like there
Yeah.
was there were no conversations going on or whatever, and everybody, and like that was before people had, and especially there, like before people had like smartphones or whatever. But still, like their heads, like everybody was just looking down. It's really weird. We got on there, it was like looking down, and then this violinist comes in. Right, doors
Yeah.
open. There's this violinist plays the saddest tune you've ever heard, like on a violin. Goes around with a hat, Nobody even looks up. Nobody's frozen a coin or whatever. He leaves. And it was just, okay, this is now like just the most bizarre, surreal situation I've ever been in. Like, forget the Nazis, forget all
Yeah.
that. What was that? Where are we? And that was like for the whole country, it seemed. I mean, of course, like people were, like at the gig and everyone was like excited and things like that. But the whole country just seemed like under like a fog, of of oppression, really.
Yeah.
Like everybody was like, there were like a lot of drunk people like just lying on the side of the road, but in their Soviet uniforms from back in the day. There were still
Right.
like statues up of like Hammer and Sickle and Lenin and stuff like
Yeah.
that, like somewhere in
That's probably
fields.
still there. But that's
Yeah.
like you when you were there, that's like, I don't know, when did you say 2015? That's not too long
No,
after
no,
the change.
that was 2004. So
2004.
that
That's
was
yeah.
2004. It was almost 20 years ago, and yeah, it was already like that the same like that Lukashenko guy,
Yeah.
um, who's still the
Yeah.
dictator there.
That
Yeah.
is such a crazy experience.
Mm.
One follow-up question to that. Did you tell your parents about this story?
I don't think I have, even though like my mom would be very interested in hearing about it. I don't think I ever mentioned it to them.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
they would be scared and not send you out again.
Well, at the time, like had they known like what we were getting
Yeah.
into,
I can imagine.
because it was
Yeah.
very much like, okay, this is supposed to be a dangerous place. Yeah, but they offered us a show. All right, let's
Yeah.
go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
okay. So we
Yeah.
did a lot of that, and there were situations like that, like Nazi attacks, or sometimes the venue you pull up and you discover is like that was the epicenter of like the local drug scene.
Yeah.
Stuff like that just very often happened, and
Crazy stuff. Crazy
mm,
stuff. So when I was preparing for the interview, I also saw that you played in a band called Carnist. And what I found interesting is how Carnist described themselves. Carnist, and I
mm,
read out now. Carnist are a DIY punk band from London, England. Unlearn is our first album. It deals with the concept of unlearning societal norms and cultural traits which are contrary to our nature, be it that our attitude towards non-human animals and indeed humans who do not fall in line with ideas of what it is to be human. And I found these lines so interesting for many reasons. The main one, because it describes a transitionary process, which we often see also in city making, how important it is to unlearn and to challenge the status quo and conventional paradigms, to the importance to experiment with alternative futures or with alternatives. And I find it quite encouraging seeing that idea, such as unlearning, have become part of the debate on how to, or at least in academic circles, how to improve, in that case, urban areas.
mm.
Um, but you do not have a background in urbanism or any related discipline, but are you're neck deep into cultural studies, right? And I would be very interested in hearing more on your thoughts on the word of, or on the concept of unlearning.
Right. I think what we were. I mean, this again. This is now probably like 10 years ago that we wrote that album. I think probably came out in 2014, 15, something like that. 8 years ago, 9 years ago. The concept for us there related mostly to diet, of course. So that was because we were like an outspoken vegan band, and that was sort of like the main focus there. But of course, it can be applied to many other contexts as well, because um, some of the things. I mean, that it goes without saying. I mean, we're cultural beings. Some of the things that we just take for granted and just accept as normal. If you take a step back and sort of like try to like unlearn your like, cultural programming, um, you'll see that that's kind of it's kind of weird that we do that. It's kind of weird that we, uh, for instance, just destroy our own basis of existence, which is nature, and things like that. So I think that's an important concept, and you kind of like have to um, unlearn, ideology, especially because that's something you don't realize you are immersed in. Like like a fish doesn't realize it's in water, right? So it's kind of like a similar idea. And but a lot of things are just very ideological, and I think for instance one of the my like recent unlearning processes, and we can have a separate discussion about that. But it was just, for instance, that I was very much opposed to nuclear power, right? Almost for my life, because I kind of like, like in the 90s, we all had the stickers, Atomkraft Nein Danke stickers, those kind of things. And only when you sort of start looking at the facts and start seeing sort of like, especially in light of like the current climate crisis and things like that, and you start to sort of, let's stop the fear mongering. Let's just look at the facts. Like, how safe is it actually? How efficient is it actually? And things like that. I think that would be like an unlearning process where things I took for granted without ever like questioning them. When you kind of like start questioning them, you kind of I mean, you can still be wrong or right about things, of course, but you kind of you're wrong or right for like better reasons. That's what I'm trying to say. That's part of the unlearning of the whatever ideology you're kind of like you find yourself in, and that can be that can be like a Christian upbringing. That can be like a very sort of like personal political ideology that you carry around with you, but don't realize that it's just one of many ideas out there, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the process.
Yeah, I agree to that. Not so much to the nuclear energy, but we can have a separate discussion on that. But to unlearning how you describe it, unlearning the programming, your own programming between ideologies and belief systems, maybe, and so on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Coming to an end, one question I'm asking everybody with a background in alternative music on the podcast: what are 3 songs to change the world to you? Which 3 songs would you name? And I would be disappointed if there is no Morrissey song in there, because I know that you're a huge fan.
What if they're all Morrissey songs? Is that
that's fine?
That is acceptable. Is that acceptable?
Yeah.
No, actually, I thought about this, and it's quite interesting. Okay, I'm actually like, I'm not gonna name 3 songs because I thought about it. Because I knew you were gonna bring something like that up. I don't know how I knew that, but I did, and I was like, no, there's really, I mean, it's just different stages in your life that's gonna be different songs. So like my sort of way out kind of like answer of that would be, of course, it's the sounds of frogs croaking, like
very good one.
Like that would be okay. If I hear that, like that's like motivation. That's why I go out and do things that I do. It's why it's what I want to hear. It's what I bring back, and when I hear it, it's kind of like it's really motivating. It's like, okay, this is now happening. But of course, there's always been songs and bands like that. And actually, and I think this ties it up nicely. The other day, for the first time in probably 15 years, at the gym, I discovered that the old Plague Mass albums are on Apple Music, which I didn't know. I didn't know they were on there. And I listened to our first album, and of course, that takes you right back to like when it was created, how it was created, the things you thought at the time, right? Because they were like largely my lyrics.
It's funny because I when I prepared for the interview, I went through your bands, and I also listened to the Plague Mass albums again on Apple Music, and it took me right back to when I was like, I don't know how old I was, 18, 19 when it came out.
Right, and I was only like slightly older, like I think we're like 3 years apart, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. At this point, unfortunately, Gerfried's battery of his phone ran out, so he couldn't give us the third song, but I asked him afterwards, and not so surprisingly, of course, it was a Morrissey song. I think it was any Morrissey song, because this guy is one of the biggest Morrissey fans you ever met. To play you out of this episode, I actually follow one of the song suggestions by Gerfried, and that is the sound of frogs and toads. So here in the background you hear frogs and toads in the field in Gran Sabana in Venezuela. I hope you liked that, and I hope you liked this show. If you did, leave a comment, rate the show, get in touch, and I really hope you like Cities Reimagined and you like this bonus episode, which is also a bit of an experiment on how people react to it and how people perceive it. So let me know in the comments or send me an email at johannes@anthropocene.city. But here it is, the frogs and toads in Venezuela. I hope to catch you soon. Bye.